I'm a very impatient boy when it comes to spring training. I love when it opens, and I will enjoy the first few, exhibition games. I think Jordan Walker being in the Cardinals camp, playing all the time, probably make it more interesting. But I reached a point pretty soon, pretty early, where I'm like, okay, let's get to the regular season now. So you strike me, correct me if I'm wrong, you strike me as the type of guy, baseball fan, who really loves all of spring training, unlike me.
I mean, I look forward to opening day like everybody else, but as a beat writer, I always enjoyed covering spring training. I mean, maybe I wouldn't want to be there for all 7 weeks, but I always enjoyed that time of year because players were more available, more relaxed in many cases. And if you're hopping around from different camps, there's a lot of people you can access to. So I've always enjoyed this time of year, and you kind of move out from February is such a down sports month outside the Super Bowl.
It is.
March is training.
It is.
March Madness. So I always kind of like the vibe this time of year, too, for lack of a better word. But, yeah.
Yeah, Travis, your point hit home with me earlier today. I was driving around. I was listening to some national radio shows, and maybe like three. I was just sampling briefly. It was like three of them. Nonstop Daniel Jones talk. And I was kind of like, what kind of special hell have I fallen into, Very hot take type Daniel Jones talk. But anyway, hey, Travis, I want to compliment you, and I already told our listeners to go to thescore.com to find it or go to your Twitter handle to find it. But you did a really good piece just explaining the situation with baseball and its the TV situation and the streaming, whatever, just the future of television in terms of televised baseball or streaming baseball. And I'm pretty incompetent about explaining it, so I'm particularly happy you're here today. So to the best of your ability, sir, could you explain to us where this is right now and what's next? Like, what would be the next step to maybe bring about some clarity?
Yeah, I'll try to boil this down as best I can. And so if we think back to 2019, Disney bought 21st Century Fox, and there are a bunch of regional sports networks that 21st Century Fox owned that I believe Disney had to sell as part of the deal. I'm not sure about that, but Disney spun off all these 19 regional sports networks, and Sinclair bought them, and the Diamond Group is a subsidiary under Sinclair, which now holds them. But they essentially bought these regional sports networks. I don't want to say it's at the peak of cable because cord cutting had already started, but there were tens of millions of more cable subscribers when Sinclair and Diamond Sports subsidiary took out like $9 billion in debt to buy these regional sports networks and add them to their cable holdings. And that was very poor timing because cord cutting has only accelerated. In 2014, I think was the top year for cable. There are about 100 million U.S. households that had cable, and at the end of 2022, it was down to like 70 million. So a 30% decline, and it's accelerated in recent years. Like I think Comcast just reported an 11% year-over-year decline in cable subs. So basically, all these regional sports networks are coming under pressure because as subscribers flee, the rights that they pay teams to broadcast games, those remain the same, and fewer subscribers are supporting them, so their cable bills go up. And then when cable bills go up, more people flee, and you kind of see this spiraling effect. And the real issue, another issue, is that Sinclair and Diamond Sports, they don't own the streaming rights to most of the MLB teams. I think they only have 4 teams where they have the cable, the linear traditional direct cable rights and the streaming rights for both teams. They have the 19 cable, or they have 14 MLB teams, sorry. They have the cable rights for all 14, but they only have the streaming rights for 4 of them. So they're trying to launch this streaming app, this direct-to-consumer product, but I'm based in Cleveland, and they have the streaming rights to the Cavaliers, but they don't have the streaming rights to the Guardians. So it's just a mess. And really the summary is Sinclair took on a tremendous amount of debt, but to buy all these regional sports networks at a time when cable's declining, and now they're of course filing bankruptcy. As they didn't pay that $140 million debt payment last week that opened that 30-day window, at the end of which they're expected to declare bankruptcy. And then there's a host of unknown questions, like if they don't pay teams, Rob Manfred has said Major League Baseball and the clubs tied to them will take back the rights and try to figure out what to do with them. So there's a lot of questions that need to be answered, but that's sort of the mess we're in. And I don't know if I explained that well.
No, you did, but it's really difficult because it's pretty complicated, and that's my frustration with it. And, the NHL, as you mentioned and you noted in your piece, the NHL had been at least perceived to be kind of slow to get on this about, okay, well, what are we going to have to do if the worst-case scenario unfolds? You mentioned that the Board of Governors, recently met to discuss the issue, and they're at least wanted to let everyone know they're starting to work on it. And I wanted to ask you about Rob Manfred because he has projected confidence when asked about this. It happened again last week, and he basically has said, I don't want to put words in his mouth, so correct me if I mischaracterize it, but basically said, look, we have a plan. We'll be fine. We have all the backup plans we need. We're going to cover every scenario. And then he leaves the door open for the termination of the restricted the blackouts, just getting rid of them, which is something that fans across the continent want. Are you confident that baseball is on top of it in terms of having the plan to make sure people still get what they want to get as far as people are relying on cable or direct TV and relying specifically on these regional networks? Are you confident that they're going to have something in place that'll at least a big Band-Aid for a while that'll take care of it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I mean, it's pretty stunning to think that, 14 major league teams and a number of NBA and NHL teams too, in about a month, don't know if they're going to be, the owners of those teams don't know if they're getting checks from these sports networks or not. And that's a huge part of the revenue that they can. And I heard Rob Manfred speak last week too, and part of the plan I think is actually pretty compelling. And he said if they do take back the rights, they will add a local in-market option to their MLB.TV product, which holds, if people are unfamiliar with it, that's the product. I think most people stream it, but where you can watch all the out-of-market games. You download it, pay, I think it's $150 a year. And
Right.
Manfred said there would be an extra charge, but they would include your in-market games on that if it falls through with the Bally apps or the Bally regional sports networks. And I actually think longer term, might be a model that MLB has to embrace, whether they want to or not. Is I think cable's on a pretty clear trajectory to, by the end of the decade, not looking at all like it does today, and probably not supporting a bunch of the regional sports networks and leagues like they do today. So Major League Baseball, NBA, NHL are all going to have to think about the future, and they're going to have to think about it probably more quickly than they wanted to. But it might have to be that direct-to-consumer option, and we'll see. It'll be interesting to see if that happens. Now, as far as like the cable, if you don't have MLB.TV, if you're not into streaming, I don't know if Major League Baseball would also. Manfred said they would also try to sell directly to cable providers the in-market games, and I have less certainty how that would work or what kind of pain owners would have to take in a discount to sell those games. And I thought Manfred, in speaking with reporters, I think that was last week, I thought he was pretty candid, and he even said that if it comes to this, owners will be taking a hit this year because they won't recoup the same amount of revenue they were promised in the existing deals with Bally and Sinclair. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting. It would be fascinating to see the direct-to-consumer option play out with 14 teams added to it, because I do think, let's say the cable model really falls apart by the end of the decade, is there? We see the tech giants like Apple, Amazon, Google fighting over NFL rights and probably NBA national rights to some extent. But there's so much baseball inventory. Are one of these streaming big tech giants going to come out and bail out Major League Baseball for all the regular season inventory? There's so many games, I don't know. I think baseball might be forced down the road to have their own direct-to-consumer Netflix-style product, which would be an expanded MLB.TV.
Well, let's hope they get it figured out. But I agree with you, and I'm glad to hear you say what you said about Manfred, because I'm generally speaking distrustful of him. But I do believe him, when he is trying to convince baseball fans that they're going to have something in place. They're prepared for every scenario. So I actually do believe him. So I hope that faith is rewarded. But I was telling Jim Hewer, and our guest is Travis Sawchik from thescore.com. Look, and I realize maybe it's apples and oranges, and I realize that MLS is not on the same scale in terms of the number of games and things like that as far as Major League Baseball. Much shorter season, much more compact. But we're very excited here in St. Louis because the expansion team's about to play its first game on Saturday night in August, St. Louis City. And the setup for television, or not television, for streaming on the Apple TV platform is very, very, very impressive. I mean, I'm subscribing because I want to watch all their games. Some will be free over the air, but I want to watch a lot of games. And the thing is so well organized, and it's so user-friendly. And there's all this adjacent content for each franchise. And I'm like, they haven't even played a game yet. I can already tell they've just scored big time with this. It's like a really wonderful job of getting this launched and having it in place already as a really highly professional, content-rich platform for their property, their MLS property. So that in a way, Travis, I may be silly here, but that in a way really gave me hope that, at some point we're going to see MLB.TV, which is already, I think, pretty damn good. Don't get me wrong, but it just shows you that it's possible to do this right. And I'm not surprised that the combination of Apple TV and the MLS was able to do that, to just come up with a really wonderful platform.
Yeah, I think that is something that could be possible, and I think that's a really consumer-friendly product. And if something like that down the road could be available to baseball fans, I think people would love it. But the thing that's really tricky is for just how this changes the dynamic of TV side revenue coming in. Because when you think about the cable model, it was most people that paid their cable bill don't watch live sports. They're subsidizing the regional sports networks, which are often some of the priciest kind of hidden charges in there. That you don't see the breakdown of each cable channel's cost in your bill, but they're some of the priciest along with ESPN. And so most people pay those when they pay their cable bill, but never watch. So when you think about every major sports league outside the NFL, they're subsidized by people who don't actually watch the games. So when that goes away, and if you're forced to go to a subscription model where you have to compel people to, like with Apple TV and MLS, to actually click subscribe because you want to watch, that's much more consumer friendly. And I think if you're drawing up a business from scratch, that's usually how it works. You sell a product and you try to get people to buy it. But I think that terrifies probably existing ownership who have been cut these guaranteed checks since the 1980s when the New York Islanders and Cablevision became the first, had the first agreement to put games on cable TV and set this model. And it's been so lucrative for owners and players. So I think something like MLS with Apple, something like that could be an option for Major League Baseball too, or maybe they have to go more direct to consumer where they sell their own MLB TV package directly to fans. So it's going to be fascinating to play out, and I think it's happening. I think it's something like this is inevitable. whether MLB finds a new third-party distributor in the streaming world or they have to sell subs on their own. But the cable model isn't going to last as we know it for too much longer, and we'll have to see how prepared the sports leagues and owners were for this perhaps acceleration and kind of the trend.
Yeah, and Apple TV Plus, of course, they initiated that relationship with Major League Baseball this past in 2022, and it wasn't ideal. And I'm talking about the game presentation itself. The way it worked was great, but you could see that the potential's there. But Travis Sawchik, I did want to ask you a couple other things. Other than the TV stuff, and although I really appreciate your insights into this, because and the story's really, really good. If people want to get caught up, again, go to thescore.com or follow Travis on Twitter, and let me do this again, at Travis_Sawchik, Sawchik, and he provides links to not only his own work but work on the Score.com site. And I wanted to ask you about that. This is a time of year where people pivot, and we're talking about what each team did in the offseason. And your colleagues at thescore.com gave the Cardinals a C grade, which I thought was fair, about their offseason. And the tone of the comments, which, again, I think were spot on. I think it reflects the overwhelming view in St. Louis, is that, hey, the Contreras signing was good. It was really good. But there was an expectation that more would be done. There would be, a couple or three more meaningful upgrades. So in that context, it was kind of disappointing. So I summed up how a couple of the baseball writers saw it at thescore.com. But now I want to ask you, did the Cardinals do enough, in your opinion, this past offseason?
Yeah, I think I was on your show right before or at the end of the season, right before free agency, and we were talking about the catcher position and how it's such an obvious need area. And I think the Cardinals did really well there, landing Contreras, and he was one of the top, if not the top, options available. I guess Sean Murphy was there, and if you preferred a younger option, maybe one of the Blue Jays kids. But yeah, I think Contreras is a great fit, and that was well done. But I do wonder just if they have I love a lot of the lineup parts the Cardinals have in place, but do they have that top of the rotation arm that can really lift you in a postseason series, that sort of guy? And I'm sure a guy like Carlos Rodon is not cheap, but did they do enough there? I don't know what other neat areas Cardinal fans are really harping on, but that was one that jumped out to me that I've been talking about for a few years. Is just get that dominant ace type guy. Just go for it, because I do think when you look at postseason history, because the series are shorter, the best arms take on more innings, and you almost can work with a three-man staff depending on off days sometimes. And those dominant number one arms just become such a big deal if you have playoff aspirations. So I keep coming. Not that it's a poor staff, but do you have that difference maker at the top? That's something I'd love to see the Cardinals find.
Totally agree, and they sort of maintain their approach, and I respect their model. It's produced a lot of consistent success over the years, but I think they've sort of fallen behind in how certain aspects of the game have changed. And power pitching, for example, strikeouts, missing bats rather than relying on pitch to contact. And look, they have the defense to do it. It might be more of a challenge with the shift being banned now. That remains to be seen. But they've sort of fallen behind the curve here. And the Cardinals have always been ahead of the curve. And so from that standpoint, I think they're slow to transition to try to get a lot more strikeout punch, not just in the rotation, but also in the bullpen. I mean, Helsley strikes out a lot of guys. Gallegos is totally fine. But if you look at Fangraphs or wherever, you look at relief pitching, and the Cardinals, I think their bullpen, even with Helsley and Gallegos down there, I think their bullpen, I'm pretty sure, had the lowest strikeout rate in the majors last year. And if it wasn't the lowest, it was next to lowest or 28th. So no, you're absolutely spot on. So I I just wonder whether they'll be scrambling for the third year in a row to, trade for whatever available pitching there is, the way they did it 2 years ago and the way they did it last year with Quintana and Montgomery. And it's been able to work out, but I don't think that's the point really, where it's you have to sound the fire alarm every July 31st or whatever. So
Yeah.
how much do you think the Cubs have improved?
They've had a really interesting offseason. I mean, they've taken some lottery ticket guys like Cody Bellinger. Can he get back to his form? I like the Tyone signing. I think he's at least a solid mid-rotation option, but the further he gets away from that second Tommy John, can his stuff play up a little more? Will it play up more away from the AL East? So they've definitely gotten better. I don't know if they're a threat to push for the top of the division, but they're not going to be. They're going to be a more difficult opponent to face. I guess it's only 13 times now, right, in division, not
Right.
19. But the division's a little stronger at the top now, middle to top. So I think they've made some. They've gotten. They're in the middle of the pack for sure, and they have some upside to play with that. So they won't be as easy and out as they've been in some recent years.
No doubt about it. Travis Sawchik, I kept you long enough, man. Thanks for your generosity of time. It was really good to talk to you again. And I hope we can do it again. We can visit right before the regular season starts when we have a better handle on all these teams and who's up, who's down, injuries, other factors. So I hope we can visit again before the start of the regular season. But until then, enjoy spring training. And we'll be reading you and all of your colleagues in all the sports at thescore.com. That's thescore.com. Until next time, be well, my friend.
Thanks so much. Great to be with you, Bernie. And the Cardinals were 29th in bullpen strikeout rate, so you're right. You're spot on.
Yeah, and that's always surprised me because you see Helsley with that monster strikeout rate, and Gallegos has been about a 30% guy, and yet even with those two guys down there, they're 20. The bullpen is 29. That's just amazing.
Jordan Hicks be a guy. It seems like a big year for him too.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Stop rambling.
No. We could talk at least until 5 o'clock if you want when Jim Thomas comes in. But yeah, it's great. But no, we'll do this again soon because I always enjoy talking to you, and we can actually get into. Hey man, the TV stuff's very, very important. But I mean, next time, if there's an update, we can talk about that. But also just talk more ball. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on.